from down in Costa Rica. Dr. Jim is the editor and publisher of the Hat Trick Letter found on his website, goldenjackass.com. And it's been a while since we last spoke, maybe a couple of months, and people have been asking me when Jim is going to be back on again. So I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Jim Willie. Hello, Jim. How are you?
Oh, I'm in a rare mood, but I'm okay.
Okay. Well, let's not elaborate on that mood. Hopefully, it's a good one. So let's jump right in. It's been a little while since we last spoke. I was traveling around a bit, and I haven't really been keeping up with what's been going on in the world other than the headlines, such as the Belgium terror attacks, etc. But you, of course, are a person that has the finger on the pulse of the world economy and the financial scene as to what is going on behind the scenes, more importantly. So where shall we begin? Shall we begin talking about once again about this subject that just doesn't seem to go away, which is this ZERP, NERP, QE destruction that is causing and the end game?
Yeah, it's almost amusing to hear about the negative interest rates. I wonder if a bond is purchased at, say, 0.5%, and then later the bond yields a -%. Does that mean it goes up in principal value? I mean, we need to rewrite the textbooks on bond trading, bond valuation, and other things like that, because we're in la-la land. This is like Alice in Wonderland. The central bankers have fallen down the rabbit hole. And there's no logic to be found anymore. They're talking about negative interest rates, and I've had the insolent perspective of, well, it means the economy is going to start breathing through its ass. Maybe they're going to call human excrement industrial production. And that way we can get the economy going again, at least on the statistics side. I mean, we are in la-la land, Dash. This is way beyond fixable. I always thought that 0% was the end point. There's nothing they can do. But they actually believe that if they offer a negative rate, then you'll have to pay the bank in order to hold your money in a safe place. Well, it's really not safe because it's at risk of a bail-in. But why would they charge money for someone to put money in a bank account or a bond? And I got a reason. I've got a very good reason why they would do that. Because they can't make any money lending. Because the economy is that bad. And on the investment banking side, there's really not much in the way of bond offerings, except in an emergency basis where a bank is about to collapse and they need some really stupid investors to come forward to offer them some capital infusion, and it's probably going to lose 30% in 1 year. They're not able to make money lending, so they don't have a lending business model that functions. Normally what they do is they offer you 3 or 4% for a savings account or a bond or something, and they go out and lend it at 6, 7, 8, 10%, and they make a profit margin. But they can't lend money out right now because it's just not working. Their entire car loan, structural loans, that whole credit segment of car loans is upside down. They're not making money on it. They're offering these 6 and 7 and 8 year loans that are totally insane.
Yeah, 0%.
So, with 0% cash back, they're trying to keep people employed in the auto industry. They're trying to keep dealerships open. But what they've done is they've made a whole new subprime bond class where they're getting these mortgage bonds, and they fill a whole tranche with toxic car loans. They're all underwater. They're underwater in the first month. They're underwater in the first week, these car loans. So you've got subprime mortgage bonds. Now you have subprime car loans, and we got $1.25 trillion worth of subprime student loans. So, nothing's working ever since Lehman hit. Nothing's working really since 9/11. But I like to focus on Lehman in 2008 because that was a very critical point. That was a starting. You could look to Lehman and say, well, this is where a number of problems began. Let's start here. And unfortunately, all the statistics for banks and loans and credit portfolios and you name it, they're all worse than they were before Lehman. So I have a phrase that I like to use. I say we're approaching a systemic Lehman event. Of course, Lehman hurt them, but Lehman was very much a mortgage event. Now what we're going to get is a credit event globally. It's going to have a mortgage piece. It's going to have a car loan piece, a student loan piece. It's going to have a big emerging market piece. It's going to have a Southern Europe pigs sovereign debt piece. It's going to have a huge energy piece. It's going to have a shale oil niche within energy piece. It's going to have a petrodollar piece having to do with Saudi Arabia, and I believe they're going to have a regime collapse there. We're going to have a Turkish piece. Wow, am I leaving anything out? Yeah, I'm leaving out a lot. So we've got Lehman-type events in a dozen areas. And I think what we're heading toward, Dash, is a breakdown of the global financial structure, a collapse of the dollar-based system, an end of the king dollar, and the ushering in of actual solutions where China takes control of the gold market. We got a big date coming up of April 19th.
What's on April 19th?
Well, Shanghai is advertising. I mean, it may not happen. Might be a slight delay. I don't know. They don't tell me with a morning update. But Shanghai is going to take control of the gold fix and take it out of London's hands because they've corrupted everything. Is there anything in the financial world that London does that's not corrupted to the core? Well, they had the London LIBOR for interest rates. They had the London gold market. They have the London, it's hard not to laugh, but all the flying bankers who flew out of windows. They have a lot of mafia connections in London, and that's some of the deaths. Is there anything London does that's not corrupt?
Nothing that I can tell you is not. So
No. It's really a complete sweep of the Anglo-Americans, and that's a phrase you're starting to hear more. It's New York, London bankers, the Anglo-American financial sector. There's one piece that's emerging with London that does show promise and shows promise of not being corrupted to the core, and that is namely the Chinese RMB hub activity of selling bonds and trading for RMB currency. I don't think that's corrupted, and I don't think the Chinese are going to allow that to be corrupted. But we've also got NATO falling apart. And we've got.
Can I just interrupt you for a second, Jim? When you said London, New York, would you include Switzerland, Germany, and France with that as well?
Yeah, I should really say they're kind of a tail on that dog. It's Western Europe bankers.
Right.
You could take the major German and French banks, and they pretty much follow suit with London. If there's corruption in London, just look to Societe Generale or Deutsche Bank in France and Germany, and you find more of the same kind of corruption. What we've got is a climax of corruption, insolvency, and toxicity in the financial structural system. So we're reaching a climax. And on April 19th, it's not just Shanghai taking control of the gold fix. It's Shanghai offering a legitimate gold futures contract based in RMB pricing. Now, they've had for, I think, over a year, correct me if I'm wrong, a Shanghai gold contract that they actually deliver on the metal. That's been going on for over a year. The new part coming is that they're going to do an RMB Chinese currency pricing of the gold futures contract. In other words, you're going to start seeing the gold price not cited in the dollar. Wow. Okay. And if you actually deliver on it, I don't know if you're going to do a poll, I would think that maybe a quarter of the people listening here, or maybe more, would not be aware that in London, if you have a gold futures contract, you cannot pick up your gold at the end of the contract.
It's also true on the comics, right?
Yeah, they say you got to have cash delivery.
Right.
Wait a minute, I'm trying to buy gold. Well, it doesn't matter. You can do cash, but you can buy another contract after we give you cash delivery. In other words, they're trying to control the entire gold price with paper, and they've got 280 ounce paper. They have 280 paper claims of a single ounce of physical. So it's a paper gold versus physical gold ratio of 280 to 1.
So that literally means that the price of gold should be 280 times higher if it was a legitimate it was a legitimate price, right?
Well, I don't think you can make that kind of a linear argument. I think what it means is you've got to have a few quantum jumps
right
in the gold price in order to achieve some sort of equilibrium. And I think we're going to have about 3 or 4 different quantum jumps. They call them nonlinear events, discontinuous events. In mathematics, if you've got a curve and suddenly, well, we're at x equal 1.5 here, and it jumps a few digits. Wow, it's not a straight line. You can't draw it with a single movement of your pen or pencil.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Discontinuous moves are coming to the gold market. I think we're going to actually see a time very soon where we don't really know what the gold price is. And I can't define soon. But what I can say is that at the end of 2015, I was making a lot of different comments about how 2016 was going to be extreme disruptions and rather chaotic, and a lot of big news items, a lot of huge, important power shifts. They call it paradigm shifts. That just means the model is changing. And we're seeing that, Dash. We're seeing that in spades. We're seeing it in incredible ways. I mean, I never thought that I'd see the day in recent months that the U.S. military would turn tail. But we turned tail in Syria. We turned tail in the Persian Gulf. I mean, that is one of the main mechanisms for defending the dollar in the last few years. When I started this newsletter in 2004, I actually said in a few years, the defense of the dollar will be done at the point of military action. And we're there. I was called stupid back then, and now it's amazing how the psychology of correct forecast reactions come. I was called stupid back in 2005, yet now people say, well, of course. What do you expect? And I say, what do I expect? I expect you can see nothing into the future like I did in 2005. And I was called stupid. I don't like being called stupid when I have a correct forecast. I don't like it.
Nobody would, Jim.
No, but what it points out is the complexity. I mean, I made a very wild-ass forecast in 2011. I said there's going to be a lot of murder of mid-level bankers. And the reason is simple. There's not going to be justice. And there are too many mid-level bankers who were mules and set up shell corporations. And by mule, I mean physically transported bearer bonds across borders.
Useful idiots.
Useful idiots who carry things. They call them mules.
Right.
Sometimes they carry cocaine. Sometimes they carry bearer bonds. And carrying a bearer bond is sometimes not illegal. It depends on the quantity, depends on the type. But the mid-level bankers knew too much. And some of them were responsible for, say, Russian mafia bad investments. And the Russians, they don't say, well, you know, this didn't work out. It's too bad, Davadish. No, they say, we're coming to visit you and we're going to cut your head off. Or we're going to put a nail gun to your head and fill your skull with nails. That's a Russian trademark. The voice is kind of funny. He said to me, Jim, when you see these banker murders, if there's no evidence at all, and the guy is just a splat at the bottom of the building on the pavement, well, that could be a very clean hit. That could be Mossad or Vatican. The Vatican has a murder squad. If you think they're all about religion and cardinals and the Bible, you're dead wrong. They've got a banker side, and they're full of murderers.
Right.
But anyway, I got off track here, a reaction to forecasts. Here's my biggest pet peeve right now regarding forecasts. I'm still getting stupid, idiot hate mail from people, and it's really not anywhere near the volume of what it was a year ago or 8 months ago or 6 months ago. It's just once every 2 or 3 weeks, a moron sends me a message saying, the dollar's not crashing like you said it would. I never said it would. I said the dollar's going to rise and rise, then rise some more, and then vanish and be replaced. And when it gets vanished, it'll vanish after rising a high level, not crashing. This is way over the head of these morons who send me the hate mail through my Contact Us window. And it's laughable. They don't get me as upset as I used to, but it's just astonishing how stupid they can be. Well, the dollar's not crashing. Never said it would. I said it's going to be in trouble.
Right.
And it'll vanish because it's going to be rejected. Which brings up a major point, Dash, that we got on our list about QE and zero interest rate and the effects. I believe QE, the hypermonetary inflation, printing of money without draining the system and using it to cover the U.S. government debt and using it to redeem toxic bonds that Wall Street holds, it is a death sentence. The Fed's monetary policy is a death sentence for the dollar. That is my opinion. That is what I've been formulating arguments for, fortifying those arguments, showing the evidence, and it's happening. It's happening without a doubt.
That would be the logical conclusion, at least from players that are outside of the U.S., like China or Russia or other emerging markets, or basically the rest of the world. It is not in their interest to stay in the dollar fold when it has been that misused and abused, and they are the ones that end up bearing the cost of it.
Well, there's a division, and I think this brings order to the chaos of our monetary policy. The nations that like it are the nations that are in debt. The nations that don't like it are the ones that have production, shipping, reserves, surpluses, banking systems that aren't replenished with funny money but actually savings. So emerging market nations, the Chinese and other producing nations, that includes commodity nations like oil producers and metal producers, iron and aluminum and copper and lead and all that. They don't like it because their savings accounts get undermined.
Yes.
But the nations like England and Italy and Spain and France and Canada and the United States, they love it because they have debt.
Right.
And the debt needs to be addressed, so they address it with printing money, which we call stimulus. It's not stimulus. It's a death sentence. It's a death warrant to the dollar, and we're seeing it die right in front of our eyes.
Okay. So, of course, it's impossible to put a time frame on it as to what. So, what's some of the, as far as the end game is concerned, what do you foresee as some of the major signs, let's say, or signposts along the way that we should be on the lookout for?
I think nations coming out and saying we don't want your treasury bills anymore. We're not going to accept that. And we actually might be there right now with the shipping industry. The shipping industry is not doing well, and we're told that there's just not a lot of demand, so the ships are coming back empty. The ships are not being unloaded. There's just not a lot of demand for the consumer nations. I think that's only part of the story. I think the press is distorting the story. I think the other untold part of the story is that the nations don't want to be paid in treasury bills. They don't want to be paid in what we're printing. They'd rather be paid with money. And they're basically saying, Dash, that the treasury bills and the dollar is not money. We're at a historic breaking point. I'd like to tell a quick story about what I believe is going to derail the dollar very quickly. Okay, we talked about the gold side, where Shanghai has the gold fix,
Right.
and Shanghai will have the RMB-based futures contract in gold. But there's something else very big going on, and it is the Chinese interbank payment system, the CIPS. If you were to canvass the American public, I would guarantee you not 1% would know what it was. If you would canvass, say, the financial sector, where they have investment banking and they have mortgages and they have securitized bond issuance and all this, investment banking for stock issuances, commercial loans for businesses, and covenant agreements, and a lot of, okay, you canvass them, and I bet you not 5% would know what the Chinese interbank payment system is. It's the alternative to SWIFT. The SWIFT code system of bank-to-bank transaction, like, say, between a Toronto bank and a Texas bank,
Right.
between a New York bank and a London bank, between a Philadelphia bank and a Paris bank.
Yes.
Bank-to-bank transactions are done with the SWIFT. I can't remember what the S stands for, but it's Worldwide Interaction Financial Transactions or something.
Right.
I can't remember what the S stands for. But if you do a Google on SWIFT, it comes right up. I'm not going to do it right now. I've done it before. I don't really care. But it's the global dollar-based bank-to-bank transaction system. The Chinese have not only come up with a CHIPS alternative, it's not dollar-based, and it has been successfully tested in live tests. Now what they're doing, since they got the bank-to-bank system working, they're trying to get the bank to, say, sovereign bond market working, that link. They're trying to get the bank to currency trading, get that link working. And when it's all working, they can say, okay, 60% of the world is done with the dollar. Do you think maybe that'll have an impact on the gold price?
Yes, of course it would, and what you're talking about, this Shanghai fix, etc., coming, I was recently in India, And I did a program recently called "The Gold Is Not Money Except in India," and this India is very actively involved in, like, trying to get as much gold as possible, even from its own citizens. Like this idea of gold, being real money. It is. If anybody wants to see that in action, I would suggest they should go down to India and they would see it. So that is something I saw firsthand. Is that how much people are looking for a replacement, let's say, for especially the Indian government, for paper to gold.
The Indian government is looking at their entire nation and society and enormous collection of households, including the largest middle class in the world, bigger than China's, and they're seeing 18 to 20,000 tons of gold.
Easily.
That is, yeah, I mean, perhaps a lot more. It could be 25,000 tons of gold. They're looking at that and they're seeing this is not really fortifying or working in any sense with the Indian financial structure.
Correct.
It's not assisting bank loans. It's not assisting support for the currency, the rupee currency. It's just not doing anything. It's just sitting in temples, sitting in homes, sitting in basements, sitting in vaults.
Right.
So they're trying to monetize it. That's the phrase.
Yes, correct.
Why don't you explain a little bit about what the offer is, because you might know a little more than me.
Well, essentially, it's like any financial institution in India, or any jeweler, just about anybody. You could walk in with your gold, and they will gladly use that as a collateral for paper. And the government has now come up with these, what they call schemes. Very interesting choice of word. Is that that you can deposit your gold with the banks, and you can earn interest on it. So it is absolutely 100% being treated as money, and that is, I guess, how it is being monetized. Now, my only concern is that this is a stealth way of confiscating the gold out of the people's hands. And once it goes into those institutions, like if it goes to a jeweler, it's a different thing because it'll be melted or whatever, but it'll stay in circulation within the public. But when it goes into a financial institution, then I think it's going to disappear down the black hole. And this is how the Indian people, who the real wealth they have is their gold, is going to be confiscated from them.
I read an article that something like 3,000 tons have participated in this program in the last year. So if that's correct, then 3 out of 20,000. So we're talking about a little less than 15% of the gold has been pulled out of the households and temples and put into the banking system. I would like to know what the fine print reads like. It's like a CD where instead of putting money in and gaining interest, you put in gold and you get money back.
Right.
You get fake money back, paper money.
Correct.
Fiat paper. I'm curious about the fine print where they would give themselves the right of not returning your gold. Under what condition? Do you know any conditions?
No, Jim, I can't say that I do. I did not look at any of the contractual, details of that, so I can't speak to that with some authority. So I won't venture to take a guess. But I'm sure they have written something in there that will allow them to confiscate it or to keep it under certain circumstances.
Or keep it longer in order to keep the system stable.
Right.
At the risk of making unstable the financial system, we hold the right to hang on to your gold a little bit longer, an indefinite period. Okay, that'll come out in time. And I think actually at least 1 or 2 Indian leaders is going to be murdered over this.
By the way, when I was there, they had a nationwide jeweler strike, and the reason for that was that the government increased the excise duty on the import of gold, because they're really trying to put curb that. That is one of their biggest source. That's one of the biggest costs they have of their foreign reserves being spent is on gold, which they do not find to be very productive. And in a manner of speaking, it is not. But for the people, that's the only safety they see. They don't see any safety in rupee, which is like inflation running rampant and loses money by the day. So, people of course want to put it in gold. But yeah, they had a big strike there that, this is getting ridiculous how much the government keeps raising these taxes and, import duties, etc., on the import of gold. That's why
Well, they've had. Go
gold
ahead.
smuggling is a major business down there. It comes from Dubai and UAE and all that. That's one of the big,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Well, they used to have an 80-20 rule where 80% of the gold that was imported had to be directly used into the jewelry business. They dropped the 80-20 rule. It seems like they dropped the import tax and then they put it right back on
They
when they
did.
realized the effect.
Right.
And they can't keep a stable policy. The problem for those who aren't really familiar with India and their imports rather, is that they're importing a lot of gold.
Yes.
And it's upsetting the trade deficit, and it's forcing down the value of their currency, the rupee.
Yes.
And as a result, they're getting more price inflation across the economy as a result of so much importing of gold. To which I say, and this is kind of a dead-end argument, I've yet to meet anybody who has a good answer, why does India not produce any gold?
That's a very
They
good
have the
question.
foothills of the Himalayas to the north. Why do they not produce any gold?
India at one time used to be the biggest producer of gold in the world. This is going back a few hundred years. And they have gold mines all over the place, which have been shuttered, and, because they say they've run out of it. But I'm sure there's plenty of that kind of, places where they can go and find gold, even if they were to, go and explore some of these old mines. I'm sure there would be something there.
Well, there's not only some residual yield in the old mines, but what I'm saying is all they have to do is get out into the wilderness more. There's no problem getting into the wilderness in northwest Canada. Why can't they get into the wilderness at the Himalayan foothills and relieve some of this pressure on their currency from gold demand, which must be imported? Okay, enough of all that. I've made that point a number of times, and there seems to be extremely little progress on that.
So, okay, so let's conclude this segment with this, with your observations, which a lot of listeners ask about that. What's going to happen with gold and silver, and you stand by your, previously stated position that yes, it is something which is going to be the only, the last man left standing will be precious metals in as far as real money is concerned, and if the Western banking cabal doesn't look upon it as money, or they try to stop people from looking at it as real money, the rest of the world is not so stupid, and they are actively pursuing policies that will bring about that, that end, that gold will be entrenched back into where it used to be as the only money in the world.
Yes, and while we're talking about gold and silver, let me just have a final few minutes here about the gold price and the chart activity, the technical analysis. I would say that roughly for 3 years, I really have not shown much of gold charts. Because I don't think between 2011 and 12 and 2014 and 15, I really don't think you could discern and conclude much from charted activity, price movements, and patterns. Something seems to have changed pretty much with the end of the year and the beginning of this new year, 2016. You can look at, say, a 5-year gold chart, and without any question at all, wow, it looks like it came off the bottom pretty well. It looks like it's really moving up and disrupting all the past trend lines, support lines. They're bouncing off the support line, breaking the trend lines, and what I'm seeing is that the prices are moving in such a way that the moving averages Okay, here are two of my favorite. It's the 20-week moving average and the 50-week moving average. But if you're looking at the daily, it would be, say, the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average.
Right.
I like looking at, when you're dealing with long-term patterns, I like looking at the weekly chart. Of course, a monthly chart is good too, but a weekly chart is really good. And you've got the shorter moving average versus the longer moving average. And what we're seeing is crossovers. The shorter, the 20-week moving average, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of my face. The shorter term moving average on a weekly basis is crossing over the longer term moving average, 20-week versus 50-week, I think it is. And that's a very big trader's signal. You've also got movement, not movement, but strong patterns in, say, the stochastics and the MACD, that's the moving average convergence divergence. Those are very widely observed cyclical indexes whose patterns are being watched. And what you're seeing is gold made a violent move in January and February off the bottoms that had been established for 2014 and 15. Just bouncing around, meandering like meaningless movements, rigged movements. They're losing their grip on the rigged gold price. Now, when you get to silver, what you're seeing is a little bit slower movements, and it seems like it's maybe 2 or 3 months behind gold. But now it's starting to look like what gold did back in January. Very exciting chart activity for gold and silver. And it brings up a conclusion that one can make without any hesitation at all. If you compare to, say, mortgage bonds or to energy credit portfolios or to the S&P stock index or to even, say, farmland, gold is the best producing asset in the world today. That's remarkable. You never could have said that in the past few years. But we've run out of time. We've not fixed anything since Lehman's breakdown in 2008. We've not had any constructive movement in monetary policy. They're all patches and inflation African-style solutions. Liquidity facilities is not the solution. The Europeans have an insult that they make of the Americans. They say the Americans will do all the wrong things, but they finally will do the right thing, but very late. And the right thing is the gold standard. And this is not even taught in economics curricula in the United States universities. I once had a very disturbing conversation with my brother, who is a Phi Beta Kappa double major in economics and political science. And now my insult to him is that you don't know what gold and money are, and you don't even know how to recognize fascism. So what the hell did you learn in college? We had a discussion where I said people need to get their money out of the bank CDs and out of pension funds and out of and out of stock indexes, mutual funds, managed pension funds. They need to get out of banks and stocks. Most people don't have bond funds. The rich people have bond funds and preferred stocks, which are kind of a mix between stocks and bonds. And my brother said to me, well, Jim, what are they supposed to do? There's nothing left. And I said, well, do you know anything about gold? Oh, that. Phi Beta Kappa economics bachelor's degree and doesn't know anything about gold. I actually said to him in the months following, did you have a single course out of the 8 you had in college in economics, a single course that mentioned gold? And he said, no, not one. I said, what the hell did you learn? And he said, well, I learned a lot of things, Jim. I said, well, name 2 that are relevant. And he said, well, I don't have any, not right now, but, I learned a lot. Like what? Besides how to lift a bottle of Heineken. What did you learn in college? Well, I learned a lot. You can't recognize money. You don't know what capital is. You don't know what fascism is. You don't know what the Patriot Act is. You don't know what the New World Order is. What did you learn? Okay.
Now, Jim, like one of the counter arguments to that would be, which I've heard myself. I know somebody that's in this position, like you were talking about, with preferred stocks and bonds and all that, because he's very wealthy. And I had this talk with him about gold, and this is exactly what he came back with was, look at my portfolio. Last year I made like 30%. Like why should I be in gold? So this is when you look at this levitating stock market. Most people are, let's say, fooled, or the illusion certainly does exist that money is to be made in stocks or in the market alone, in the paper market alone. How do we counter that argument?
By asking them what their price-earning ratio is. And you get a blank stare.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get an answer like, well, they're all within reasonable levels. And then you got to ask, well, what is your actual future earnings estimates? And they come up with something nonsensical. And then you say, well, a year ago, how did the 2015, late 15 and early 16, how did those future earnings estimates turn out to be? You get another blank stare, and for those who are informed, they say, well, they all came out actually much lower than the estimates, which means that the price earnings ratios are grotesquely inflated.
You're absolutely right. Maybe I should go back and talk to them. And now that in the Canadian market especially has been decimated, and a lot of these funds that were, I know a guy that was running a fund with maybe had a couple of billion or something, and is now down to like 800 million or something like that. And that's all tied into the oil price and everything else. So you're absolutely right about these future estimates. They are always...
Well, Des, it gets worse. If they, pardon me, if you look at the estimates, say, in the energy sector, you've got falsified accounting.
Yes.
So, pardon me, wrong tube. The Dallas Fed has actually advised the energy companies working with the big banks to cooperate so that they don't have proper mark-to-market on their energy portfolios. And what we're seeing is a climax of false accounting.
Wasn't that made the official policy after Lehman? That you can basically
that's for the banks.
Right.
That was for the banks regarding their bonds.
Okay.
But now what you're seeing is that the energy firms are being told you can falsify your entire accounting so that it doesn't look so bad. And in that way, you can maybe find an idiot to buy some of your assets, overpay, and put the money back to the banks to pay off your debt. So let's falsify the accounting because you're really busy with your asset sales. In other words, make fraudulent the whole system so that the energy firms can find idiots to do asset sales at wrong prices. They're getting cooperation from the central bank in this fraud. Okay, when it comes to the stock market, I have trouble holding back my laughter. And why is that? Well, for a number of reasons. If you were to ask some professionals in the finance sector, why is the price-earning ratio so high right now? And they say, well, it's because the interest rates are so low. And we like the Fed valuation model that's served us well for 30 or 40 years, which says that when interest rates are low, price-earnings ratios, in other words, stock prices relative to their earnings, stock prices can be really high because interest rates are really low. The cost of borrowing's low, and you just invert it and you end up with high PE ratios. And I asked the question, but doesn't that assume that there's an economic recovery around the corner? And they say, yes, it does. To which I say, but we don't have an economic recovery around the corner, and that's been the great lie. Well, we have not around the corner, but lurking in the weeds, all the present day weeds, is the central bank illicitly buying stocks with easy money granted to the Wall Street banks. Now, the central bank of the Fed has no charter to buy stocks. All the stocks that they buy are illicitly done, and they're done through the Wall Street banks, and it's all improper. So you hear the argument that a recovery is right around the corner. And it's almost legislated, Dash, that if you talk about the economy, you must use the words in recovery. Well, it's not in recovery. It's sinking worse. And that's one of the big facts of 2016. The recession's getting worse. The lie on the inflation rate is getting worse. The only thing that's going down in prices lately is gasoline. Everything else is continuing its merry march upward. So we don't have a recovery around the corner. Instead, what we have is the big banks exercising their covenant agreements with, say, the energy firms and saying, we're going to foreclose on your asses. We're calling in the loans. And I looked at about 4 or 5 months ago a pattern where the big banks would issue another extension loan to a company in distress and say, we got such a big loan with you, we're going to help you with your loan servicing cost. In other words, we're going to lend you your next payment on your interest and principal and all that. And now the banks are saying we're not going to do it anymore. So they've ended the charade with the energy sector. The energy sector is actually a breaking point for the banks. I mean, they suffered an enormous blow in 07 and 08 with the mortgage sector and housing and loans and all this, home loans. And now they're set up to make a giant breakdown in the energy sector because the oil price is not rebounding. Okay, when we had almost legislated that you had to say a sluggish recovery for the economy, now we're beginning to start to see the same laughable bullshit where, well, we're starting to see a bounce in the oil price, and we expect that by the second half of 2016, we're going to be back toward $50, when we're not. I had a number of questions right before the March newsletter was posted of the Hat-Trick letter. A lot of people saying, looks like oil has made a pretty good recovery from, say, $30 or a little bit below up toward $40. And I wrote in my newsletter, yes, but take a look at the chart, look at the moving averages, look at the resistance levels. My guess is that this has been engineered by the big banks so that they can recover for their quarterly earnings, so that they can maybe help some of their clients to dump assets to morons who don't know what's going on, who think that the oil price is going to go back to $70 in another year. So then I got something from Euroraj to verify my point. He said, Jim, I got some news for you. All the big banks have been buying oil, pushing up the price because they wanted an end of quarter, not so much end of quarter, but end of the, it's triple witch. It was the third Friday of March. If a month is divisible by 3, it's a major triple witching month, and that means March, June, September, and December. They're very important. It's stock indexes, futures option indexes, and one other, I can't remember the triple. So the banks were engineering a higher oil price so they could screw all the shorts in oil who expected it to continue down.
Right.
More rigged games.
Makes sense.
That whole game is changing because the triple witch is over. And I said in my March newsletter, look for the oil price to roll over, and that's exactly what it's doing. It's rolling over, heading back down. I think we're going to retest the lows, but we might not hit the exact lows of before. We might still get a lot of systemic support. I would not be the least bit surprised to learn soon that the Federal Reserve is supporting the oil price. Again, illicitly, through the Wall Street banks and free money. You can do a lot with free money. I would like to be given $1 billion so that I could do a whole lot of projects here. I could do a lot with $1 billion. The trouble is that it's fake money. And, I get the question a lot, Dash, well, when is this all going to end? When does this musical chairs game end? And I say, well, it seems like when the Chinese pull the plug on the music. And I think that's coming.
Well, at the beginning of the year, the first show or the end of last year when we did, you did. This is one of the major themes which you just spoke about a few minutes ago as well. That 2016 was going to be a very volatile year, and it certainly is shaping up to be that so far into 3 months into the year. And there's no reason to expect that things are going to now stabilize and it's going to be, all wine and roses from here on in. I think it's going to get more volatile, and there will be more disturbances in the force, so to speak, as the year progresses.
Yeah, well, we have lots of surprises still to come. And one of the big change agents out there is the war footing. The war theaters.
Yeah, let's talk about Syria and Russia and all those war, Turkey, what's happening there, and geopolitics in general. So what enlighten us, please.
Well, I don't have all the answers, not at all, but there's a lot of pressure in Ukraine right now, which has been out of the news for a long time.
For a year now.
Yeah, well, several months ago, I don't know exactly, but 6, 8, 10 months ago, there was a lot of talk about the Minsk agreement.
Right.
And then the Minsk, the second Minsk agreement, they call it M2A. And it was an agreement forged by Russia and Germany and the United States. And very curiously, Ukraine was not represented in it.
So it was an agreement on Ukraine without Ukraine.
Yeah, they might have had some little puppet guy in there, but he was sent to go there and watch and take some notes and nod his head.
Right.
And now if you look at the Minsk II agreement, you see that the violations are almost uniformly on the Kiev, Ukraine side. No violations from Russia. Germany is fully with a handshake with the Russians that all is well on our party's side. And it's becoming a little bit more clear as time passes that the controlling arms in Ukraine are from the United States and Israel. They occupy most of the minister posts.
Right.
And the parliament in Ukraine is very angry that their gold, which was removed by the New York Fed thugs in March of 2014, that the Ukraine gold has not been returned.
Sorry, I got
The parliament in Ukraine is upset that their gold has not been returned in 2 years. I said as soon as it was removed that they'll never see it again. But the New York Fed said that they're going to put it in safekeeping because it's a unstable zone. Okay, enough about Ukraine. The big issue right now is Turkey. And Dash, I don't have a lot of firm notes in front of my face regarding Turkey, but here's some of my bigger impressions. when Russia came in to clean out the strongholds of ISIS within Syria and maybe a little bit of northern Iraq, and maybe Kurdistan, which is also northern Iraq, but on the eastern side. When Russia came in, what they did was they exposed how ISIS was a project by the U.S., British, and Israeli security agencies. And there was a very important event that took place at the September G20 meeting. Putin came in, and before the formal meetings took place, he said, "We got a little preliminary PowerPoint show for anyone who wants to come over into this audience and check it out." And his PowerPoint show was a very detailed description with flowcharts of how the funding for ISIS all came from the Swiss banks with connections to the U.S., the British, and the Israeli security agencies. In other words, he exposed ISIS as being an Anglo-American Israeli terrorist project. Okay, so then you had the Turkish president get exposed, his son exposed for black market trafficking of stolen oil. And, you know, Western readers read this and they don't have any idea what's going on. Where did the stolen oil come from? Well, it came from ISIS raiding the Iraqi oil fields.
Right.
Kurdistan is loaded with oil. Kirkuk in Kurdistan, in the northeast sector of Iraq, is loaded with oil. ISIS came in there, basically took over several oil fields, and started selling oil on the black market. I actually have a client who works in Wall Street, and he told me this back in December. He said, "Jim, you need to be aware, Wall Street firms are brokering stolen oil for ISIS." And I said, "Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's got the Langley connection." And he said, "Yes, and they're brokering it at $20. So they're selling it at a price. If they sell it for $30, they make $10 per barrel. So the stolen oil in ISIS from northern Iraq is a profit center for Wall Street banks. And whatever Wall Street does, so do the London banks. They work together. They're Mutt and Jeff. They're just two sides of the same coin. They're two rooms in the same building.
Right.
So the son of President Erdogan, I mean, I'm told that I mispronounced the name, but I'll just pronounce it how it looks in English, Erdogan. I hear it's Erdogan or something like that, Erdogan. Anyway, the president of Turkey has had his son implicated as being a very big black marketer, not just in oil, but in arms and probably narcotics. Shortly after Russia came in and disrupted this whole ISIS game in Iraq, Syria, you had an arrest of a Saudi prince in Beirut with 23 boxes full of heroin. And I thought, okay, they interrupted the payroll stream for ISIS because ISIS is paid in narcotics. The unit of payment, the money unit for ISIS guerrillas is narcotics. It's heroin. So then you got a lot of friction between Russia and Turkey because Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet that was on a mission to bomb some ISIS strongholds.
Right.
When I say ISIS stronghold, it's very possible that they were Turkish. And for Americans who don't know what's going on, the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey, is the field operations point for ISIS, run by Langley and the Mossad. We're abusing another embassy, this one in Turkey, like we abused the Libyan embassy, which was used as an arms dealer depot transit point for moving arms through Egypt to Syria. And Ambassador Stevens got in the way,
Right.
and Hillary Clinton saw to it that he was killed. You can call it treason, you could call it second-degree murder, you can call it conspiracy, you can call it anything, but in doing so, Hillary earned herself the right to run for president. Okay, so a lot is going on with Turkey. The Russians decided, okay, we're going to eliminate the tourists from entering Turkey, and now the coastline hotels in Turkey are 90% vacant. And that's just one of several industries in Turkey that's a mess. Okay, now there's more. The U.S. had we sent the guy with the reconstructed jaw. What's his name? Oh, yeah, Kerry. Secretary of State Kerry was sent to the Kremlin with his tail between his legs, and he contradicted the long-standing Obama statement that we will never permit Assad to remain as president or leader or king or whatever he's called, I don't care, of Syria. So Kerry announced that we're reversing that position. Not only that, but Kerry announced that he was going to be putting pressure through the U.S. government offices, officially, on Turkey to get their troops out of Syria. And Syria said, F you, we're not doing that. They gave them the bird and said, we're not interested in your orders. We're doing what we want to do. It got a lot more hairy because the Germans and the French began working closely with the Russian military to clean out the terrorists operating under ISIS flags. And this is not simple because there are about 4 or 5 different groups operating. And for those who are not very familiar, it's impossible to tell who's who. And the U.S. likes to say, well, our U.S. military attacked a stronghold, ISIS stronghold in Syria, and we've eradicated some of their depots. No, they didn't. They blew up a bridge and electricity generating station in order to cripple the Syrian economy. So a lot of the U.S. news about U.S.-based news about what the U.S. military is doing in Syria is all lies. Okay, so it got all hairy. Now what I believe is happening is the core to NATO is working closely with the Russian military, where Putin did something brilliant. He said, who's going to help me and Russia to clean out terrorist camps, trading routes, depots, money centers, and recruiting lines in Syria? Who's going to help in this noble cause? The French and the Germans stepped forward quickly, and the British did what they usually do, a cowardly secret action where they went to Paris and said, we will provide weapons and logistic support, but don't tell anybody. I don't care for British politicians any more than I do American politicians. I could go on for half an hour of what scum and lowlives they are. But, so we have Putin attracting the core of NATO, France and Germany. There's no bigger core to NATO than France and Germany. You might get Italy and Spain joining a little bit, but that is not the core. That's not where the wealth, that's not where the power, that's not where the voice is. Okay, what about the fringe to NATO? Now you have the NATO nations in the last few weeks making overt, clear, explicit statements. We will not support you, Turkey, in further military actions in Syria. You're on your own. For a while, I was actually wondering if maybe the United States was setting up Turkey in order to ignite a wider war with Russia, so that there would be a war with Russia over Turkey and Ukraine and Syria. But now Putin has done an exit. I read a hilarious statistic the other day. Somebody has retrieved some data from official sources to the effect that the Russian military has spent $550 million in Syria on their activity in the last few months, and now they're starting to pull out. And they made a comparison. The same person who raised this made a comparison to the U.S. Pentagon budget. And they found a line item in the Pentagon budget that's hilarious. The U.S. spends approximately $1 billion a year on marching bands. Musical marching bands.
$1 billion.
They spent twice as much every year, not this year, every year. They spend twice as much money on marching bands compared to what Russia did in several months in Syria only. So who's got the spending problem, Russia or the United States? Well, how do you define problem? The Americans have no difficulty in funding our expenses because we print money to cover our deficits.
Right.
Desh, I got to explain something that is extremely important and powerful about geopolitical changes as they relate to military matters that has now finally come to the fore and has reached some of the press networks. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with Cato back in 2013. I was living in a certain building. He was nearby. We bumped into each other once in a while. And he sat me down and said, Jim, I want to explain something to you. It's kind of subtle, but very, very important. And you're going to become aware of this in the next couple of years. And he said, the United States really has two militaries. And I said, you mean like Pentagon and Langley? And he said, yeah, but let me explain. He said, the Pentagon has military, and it's paid by the taxpayers. I said, you mean it's paid by deficit? And he said, yeah, paid by deficits that are covered, right. And that's one side. I said, well, let's call them the Pentagon regulars. And he said, okay. But he said, but there's another side. It's Langley mercenaries. And I said, you mean like Blackwater? And he said, well, Blackwater is more like the set of generals. They're out there recruiting. Blackwater's in charge of, say, battalions. They enter the field with a Blackwater officer. Forget the rank. A leader, a chief on the field, is your Blackwater figure. And I said, well, who are they hiring? And he said, well, they're hiring a lot of Muslims. I said, you mean like Saudis? He said, well, it's a lot more than Saudis. They're hiring people from Eastern Europe who are of Muslim descent, who just want to, get a job and kill people for fun, kill people for hire. They make some money and kill. There's always a demand. You can always find people who would do that. I said, okay, what's the big issue then? And he said, there will come a day in the next couple of years when you will find on a given battlefield, on a certain theater of war, the Pentagon regulars on one side and the Langley mercenaries on the other. I said, oh my gosh, so the U.S. versus the U.S. He said, in a sense, yes, but that's a stretch. It's more like the U.S. fighting its hired foreign mercenaries. I said, I understand. And I said, and these mercenaries are paid by narcotics, right, Cato? And he said, yes, exactly. So you've got taxpayer-funded regulars from the Pentagon versus narcotics-funded mercenaries from Langley and Mossad. And I said, well, what do you think the effect will be when this happens? And he said, the end of the U.S. government as you know it. I said, well, that's a pretty broad statement. What do you mean by that? He said, I don't know whether it's going to happen in the middle of Obama's second term or toward the end, But what it will force is significant structural changes in the high command for U.S. military activity, and maybe even some negotiated changes for White House leadership. I said, you're speaking in a lot of very nice terms, but are you talking about a military coup? And he said, possibly yes. I said, wow, this is pretty big. And he said, yes. It may not happen for another year or two, but when it does, there are many high-ranking people in power who will not tolerate this. You cannot have the U.S. military-industrial complex fighting a war against itself, because both sides are supplied by U.S. weapons makers, weapons firms, McDonnell Douglas,
right,
whatever.
Raytheon, all that, yeah.
Raytheon. I said, we're not talking about, high sophisticated missiles and all this. No, we're talking about basic guns, grenades, tanks, RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades. You cannot have the Pentagon fighting the Langley side. That's Washington versus Langley. You can't do that. I said, well, they can, but they're going to create a lot of disruption. He said, yes, but there are forces in place right now that if that ever happens, they pull the plug on the leadership as being out of control. I said, okay. I pointed out in my hat-trick letter back in December or so that we were seeing evidence of exactly this phenomenon. The U.S. military going in there, making strikes against ISIS strongholds, which were basically Langley provided, Langley funded, Langley organized, and Langley supplied with weapons. So the Pentagon was killing the Langley mercenaries in December, and I pointed it out. Now, I've gotten about 5 emails from clients in just the last week pointing out alternative media reports, articles, of precisely this point. We're in a chaotic situation where the Pentagon is now at hot war with Langley mercenaries.
Does Langley control the White House?
Pardon me?
Does Langley control the White House?
Well, of course, ever since Papa Bush. Ever since Papa Bush, we've had the narcotics presidency.
Is that why Obama removed a lot of the generals and admirals and, a lot of the top brass of the Air Force and stuff? A lot of those guys have been dismissed under his command.
Obama's not the first. It started with Clinton. In 1992, so we've had 23 years of purging of the U.S. military high command. Clinton.
So there's going to be a lot of pissed off people, like, in the upper echelons of the Defense Department, the Pentagon, I would say.
Well, depends on whether you're talking about active generals or retired generals.
Yeah, I mean retired, and I'm sure there must be some active ones as well.
Well, yeah, but the retired ones don't command anything except their own retirement check. Okay, let me explain something. There was terminology that developed during the Clinton administration, 8 years of purging. They called them loyalists versus constitutionalists. The constitutionalist general or admiral was a man or woman who believed that they were upholding the Constitution in the name of the people. Okay, those people were dismissed. The other side is the loyalists. It's like loyal to the king, the king of narcotics.
Right.
The loyalists are the narco side. And they all elevated in their positions, and unfortunately, quite a few are Satanists. I'm told by one source of mine that all 5 Joint Chiefs are Satanists. And I said, well, I hope you're wrong. We may never find out. Okay, then came Bush II and his 8 years, And he had numerous dismissals and forced retirement of more generals and more admirals. Now you have 8 more years of the third narcotics president. Well, that's actually the fourth. Papa Bush, followed by Clinton, followed by Baby Bush, followed by Obama. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 terms. 28 years of narcotic presidencies in the United States. Obama has actually dismissed as many as his predecessors. Now, I have been told that there are 500 generals and admirals that have been forced into retirement. One of the most recent got some publicity, a woman named Admiral Rice. Admiral Rice refused to hand over to Obama launch codes for nuclear weapons. The Pentagon white hats, the good folks, put in a protective measure within the nuclear arsenal to put one more layer between the president and the button. And the president does not like it. So they forced Admiral Rice into retirement. I'm told that there are 500. 500. Mm-hmm. And they've organized. I don't want to go into the beginning of their movement. It happened in 1995. Just look up Oklahoma City. These 500 admirals and generals, well, predominantly generals, have organized something called America First. America First is basically the constitutionalists making their statement, slamming the table. We will install the Constitution once again. Well, wait a minute, isn't the Constitution in force now? No, it's not. The Patriot Act marginalized the Constitution. I laugh every time the Supreme Court makes a statement where they quote the Constitution. It was marginalized by the Patriot Act. They should be quoting the Patriot Act. And recently they have done just that by giving continued permission of the police force across the United States to seize any and all cash they come in contact with, like with stopped automobiles.
Yes.
Oh, I tell you, Desh, there were 1,600 incidents in 2015 of police stealing citizens' money roadside. And I actually have a client who knows someone who had a good deal of money stolen. I said, how much? He said, several $100s. I said, what do they say? This, under the Patriot Act and anti-terrorism, we are seizing this money. Gosh. I mean, I wonder where it goes. You know, they seize the money, they steal it. Where does it go? Is it like Latin America, where it goes into the policeman's pockets as supplementary income? My guess is that it goes into a special fund with the name of George Bush family on it. So that's the phenomenon that Cato explained, and we're in this now firmly. There are some congressional members who are aghast that the U.S. military machine is at war with itself. It's chaos. I mean, can you imagine you've got a big family and you've got son number 1 fighting son number 7, who's a bit wayward, and they're killing each other. What does Dad have to say about this? Well, unfortunately, Dad is working with the dark sheep, the black sheep of the family. So I don't know how this is going to turn out. I just don't know. I think we're going to start seeing some deals where the president has to comply with certain rules, and we're going to be asking the question, who's in charge? I don't know.
Well, it's certainly uncharted territory, and order out of chaos seems to be something, whether it's planned or unplanned, that the chaos definitely seems to be widening. So I wonder if there's a planned order that will follow.
Well, usually when chaos is promoted, they've got martial law in mind. And I think martial law...
That's a good segue into this Belgium terror attacks and all that's going on. And of course, that's a perfect excuse for martial law, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I like to tell a preliminary story. We're getting off economics and finance, but that's okay. It's interesting to hear, and I also think it's edifying to hear. It's valuable to be informed in this manner.
Well,
Okay, let's go
politics and
back.
economics are intricately connected, so we need to discuss these subjects as well.
Yeah, but terrorism is not integrally connected with finance unless you're talking about defending the dollar. It gets very hairy, Dash. Okay, let me go back to August of 2015.
Mm-hmm.
We were hearing a lot about refugees. We saw pictures of ships crossing the Mediterranean loaded with people hanging on the yardarms.
Right.
We heard stories about people falling off, 30 miles from shore and drowning. Heartrending stories.
Yeah, babies washing up ashore and all that. Yes.
Yes. It was the Italian and Spanish shores and Greek shores that were involved. Okay, so I started asking the question, who's paying their passage? I mean, I get criticized a lot for thinking outside the box and thinking in strange ways. Well, gee, Jim, that's kind of a weird question. I actually said to my father, Dad, I'm kind of curious who's paying the passage. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you got a guy named Mahmoud and his wife and 2 kids, and they jump on a steamer and hope for a new life in Italy. Who's paying for their passage? And he said, gosh, I never thought about that. I said, Dad, this is how I think. This is why I'm different. This is why I don't get along with my own family members. I ask questions that you don't think about and you don't even care about. I said, do you want to know what I learned? Who's paying for the passage? And, it was a very short conversation, and, oh, Jim, I'm getting tired. I think it's time to go. I get that a lot. In other words, I don't want to talk to you anymore.
Right.
Let's pretend I'm tired, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I learned. The Soros groups, NGOs, non-government offices or organizations. Yeah. And several Langley-based NGOs were putting together millions of dollars to fund passage for the supposedly Syrian refugees. Okay, well, that's interesting. Why would they do that? And all I could think of was human garbage dumping on Europe. And
well, that's proven to be the truth, though, now, isn't it? In Germany, in Sweden, in all these places where they have gone, there seems to be, chaos developing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let me get to New Orleans in a minute. I'm taking some notes for myself. So I reasoned this following way. If the Soros, which is European dirty element, and the American dirty element are paying for Syrians, and what I learned from an Italian client was in Italy, there are a lot more black Moroccans than there are Syrians coming across in those ships. So it's not just Syria, it's North Africans and Syrians together, all of them. I reasoned the following way. If the dirty elements of Europe and the United States were paying for passage, then my guess, this is, remember, August of 2015, my guess was that they were providing flow for cover for nasty hired terrorists to go into Europe and blow things up. So I said in my August newsletter, it's on record, look for a major Western European city to suffer a major terrorist event in the next couple of months. What was it? Paris in September, right?
Right, yep.
Correct forecast. Notice the logical flow. NGOs paying passage to create the flow to cover the nasty hired elements that are hired to go in to blow things up.
I read that, a lot of these, sorry to interrupt you, but I read that a lot of these so-called refugees, they're not like women and children and young, like the pictures that were plastered, but it's actually young males.
Well, it's a lot of young men because I think they're the perfect ones to do all kinds of nasty things like rob stores, rape women, set off bombs. Young women don't like doing things like that.
Right.
They're much more involved in making things and organizing their groups and maybe sewing some clothes, taking care of little kids. While the single boys, single men, they're perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. So, okay, if you look at the details for the Paris event, there was a woman named Jimena, a Mexican woman from Mexico City, who phoned home after surviving the attack in that theater, phoned home to tell her boyfriend and her parents, "I'm fine. I'm with the police now, and there were some dead people. There were some killings.
Right.
But I'm okay. I'm with the police now." She was found dead 2 days later by her family.
So who were the terrorists then? Who did the killing? That's the question then.
I think it was the Mossad working together with the French security agencies. Okay, now you've got a little bit different event in Belgium. Okay, I'm done with my Paris story. I'm done with my correct forecast of an oddball type. Now, a terrorist attack at the Belgian airport. I asked the question right away, who's in charge of the Belgian airport security? Do you want to hazard a guess?
Would it be the Mossad?
The Mossad of Israel. So, did they have a security breakdown or did they have a security organized terror event? Now there's another clue. The Belgian government officials were given advanced warning of a possible attack, which they did not act upon, I reason, because they knew the Mossad was going to do it. Okay, it just gets very ugly. The better question right now is, what is their goal? What are they trying to do?
Exactly. That's the $64 million question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of simple. They want enough disruption to declare military rule. They want the Russian sanctions to cause enough economic deterioration so that they can basically say, we're going to install a fascist state where you don't have a lot of rights and everything's on an emergency measure, and we really don't need democracy anymore.
I think Paris is still under a state of emergency.
Yeah, well, Paris and parts of Italy are constantly under emergencies. So it's getting very ugly. We're getting to crunch time where we either put out of office the leadership or we say, all right, let's just go to full-bore fascism, which I think is the goal. The New World Order is global fascism, with headquarters in various Western states.
Is that why, this is related, but not on our list here, but is that perhaps why Mr. Trump is being promoted as is being perhaps being groomed to take over the office? He'd be the perfect fascist, wouldn't he?
I don't know. And I'll be honest about something. Ever since I heard Hillary was running for office, I thought this is probably the biggest stain on U.S. presidential politics in its history, if that is even possible to make a bigger stain than Bush, Clinton, and Obama. So when I have clients write to me and say, what do you think of Cruz? What do you think of Jeb Bush? What do you think about Hillary? You think it'll be Hillary versus Trump? I have a snap answer that's really quite flippant. I write back and say, I don't follow third world politics. I don't care who the next president is. Whoever it is probably going to preside over a new currency and a debt default. Do you want that job?
Well, not me, but there's plenty of people that do.
Yeah. Well, I think the better question is, do you want that presidential pension afterwards? I mean, Clinton loves his presidential pension. Now, this is broken. I don't care who the next president's going to be for the simple reason that they're going to be presiding over economic mayhem, a new U.S.-only dollar, and a debt default. I don't think that's a job worth pursuing. Now, Trump believes that he can clean up a lot of things, but usually when presidents try to clean things up, they end up being murdered. And if you're not aware of the past assassinations, they're as long as your arm, and there's a common theme to them: removing the bankers from power. That includes Abraham Lincoln. McKinley, Buchanan, they were both gold standard advocates. Lincoln was not so much a gold standard advocate as he was an advocate not to use London bankers to finance the Civil War. He reasoned that if the London bankers financed the Civil War, they would eventually be in charge of the United States government because the war would deplete both sides. And that's the banker formula for control of a nation.
Right.
Fund both sides, let them kill each other, ruin a lot of capital, and then the bankers are in charge because the debts cannot be repaid. It's a brilliant plan that's worked for several hundred years, and they're not done with this, with executing on such a plan. Little do Americans understand that during the Civil War, there were weekly editorials in the London Times saying, Lincoln must die because he has not borrowed money from the London bankers to finance their war. Instead, they came up with the Continental Dollar, which is basically kind of like a war bond. You put some money up, you help the government pay for the war costs. And the upshot of the Constitutional Dollar was that it was finally redeemed at 10 cents value per the dollar. It lost 90% of its value. Now, so that meant that the investors for the Civil War lost 90% of their investment. Instead of having the London bankers saying, we're coming in to seize the collateral for the defaulted debts. And the collateral would have been massive seizure of buildings and institutions across the United States, more than the British already have.
Yeah, Manhattan, D.C.
And you go to John Kennedy. It's kind of sad, but it's also a little bit funny. There are so many reasons they wanted to kill Kennedy. There are about 10. I'm not going to review them all, but I'm going to tell you one that I've heard recently. It makes some logical sense, and it's just one more in a long list, but he wanted to establish the silver certificate with borrowed gold from foreign sources, and the American bankers said, no way, we're going to put you 6 feet under. Okay, but here's one of the most recent reasons and justifications I heard for the killing of Kennedy. John Kennedy had a sexual affair with Marilyn Monroe. Well, let's just say that he liked to get his hands on some of the finest that the women had to offer in the United States. So I heard from Secret Service stories that he had 200 women visit the White House for, how should I say,
meetings,
sessions?
Some meetings?
horizontal sessions. Okay, now here's what the story claimed. This came from survivors on the Monroe side. John Kennedy had some pillow talk with Maryland.
Right out.
And the pillow talk was not about the gold or silver standard.
Right.
It was about ET technology.
Okay.
That was obtained through the Eisenhower years.
Right.
And John Kennedy wanted to have a press conference to reveal to the American people, who he claimed had the right to know about alien technology. There's quite a lot in the U.S. military arsenal that comes from ET technology, as I've come to understand. I don't care to produce the list. But apparently, John Kennedy mentioned his desire, and Marilyn Monroe said, "If you don't, I will." And that was overheard through the monitoring in the bedrooms. And she was given a heroin hotshot to make sure that she did not have a press conference to reveal John Kennedy's awareness of U.S. military benefits on ET technology. Oh my gosh. So Bay of Pigs, Jimmy Hoffa, Silver Standard, Marilyn Monroe, it goes on and on. There's so many. Revenge over Joseph Kennedy Sr. and a promise made to the mafia. There's so many pieces to the Kennedy murder.
CIA, splitting the CIA into 1,000 pieces. That I'm sure didn't go over too well, that kind of statement.
Right. What essentially Kennedy was objecting to was, under the roof of the U.S. government, there would be a crime organization with no accountability. And eventually the lack of accountability became a straining point with the Senate Armed Services Committee and their security oversight watch teams. So the response to Langley was, we need our independent income source. And that's when in the 70s they began getting into the narcotics business. Okay. So they could fund their black bag operations. And it gets all very weird and very ugly, but anyway.
Let's summarize this, or let's see as far as conclusion in regards to these subjects, such as the Belgium terror attack. What would you say is the possibility, or rather the probability, of such events as Belgium and Paris happening on U.S. soil?
Well, they already have. Sandy Hook, Waco, Texas. Now we've got a big deal going on in Oregon where, was it Brady or Bundy or something? I can't remember the exact name.
Yeah.
The mall shootings. Does anybody realize that Sandy Hook had not been in session for school for almost 2 years when the abduction of all the school children took place at Sandy Hook, where there was no school? I forgot to follow up on one point. I have a note here that says New Orleans. There's a big hubbub over the Arab refugees and the influx. United Parcel Service has been hired by the U.S. government to fly in the middle of the night tens of thousands of Arab refugees, and right now the dumping is going on in New Orleans. One of the UPS executives voiced his displeasure, and the U.S. government saw to it that he was fired. So we have secret, middle of the night, unauthorized, at least as far as complying with, not import, what's the word? Customs, compliance. Immigration rules, completely under the radar as far as official status, official compliance. So UPS, there's a good company to boycott. Okay, we've got a lot of terrorist events in the United States. The Boston Marathon was a staged event. Aurora, Colorado was a staged event. The shooting of Ronald Reagan in the second month of his office, that was another staged event. Hinckley was, he's a robot from the Langley crew. So I'd rather not close on terrorist topics. I'd rather try to close on a lot of indications pointing to how we're going to see a big move in the gold price and a rather broad-based boycott and strike against the use of the dollar. And I've been making this statement for several months. The gold standard is not going to return in the currency market. The first installation will come in the trade ports. Ships come in and they're paid with gold or gold trade notes. They're not going to accept the treasuries. That's where the boycott's going to take place. Shipping and ports for trade. After that, you're going to see the movement toward banks to recapitalize themselves, load up on gold as capital core assets. I think either the first or the second big push in the gold price is going to be from banks holding huge amounts of gold across the Western world, maybe even Asia too. I don't see why Korea and Japan wouldn't be included. The big banks owning huge amounts of gold and then giving the order, all right, let's send it up. Let's double this gold price from 1,800 to 3,500. I know it's not double, but you get the point.
Yes.
So that would be the banks signing on to the gold standard. And the last step is currencies. And this is where the dollar dies. The dollar, it's not going to crash. It's going to be replaced. There'll be a new dollar. And I'm actually hearing some indications that there might be a legitimate dollar established. I mean, with a gold backing. The issue is, where does the gold come from? The answer is not from the U.S. We don't have a case where Rubin, Clinton, and Bush have supplied gold to the U.S. government in order to make a gold-backed dollar. That's not likely to happen because they have used, Bush, Rubin, Clinton, they have used the gold for other purposes. They've built a network of underground cities, and they've built a fleet of spacecraft. I don't want to get into a lot of details, but these are not standard rocket-based powered aircraft. We're talking about spacecraft with anti-gravitational power systems, propulsion. This is not new. It's just new to people who are kept in the dark, which includes over 90% of the Americans. I don't think we're going to see American-sourced gold for the United States dollar. I think it's going to be, if it happens, I don't think it's going to happen. I think what they're going to do is they're going to come up with a fake gold backing for the dollar. I've been very consistent with this. I think they're going to say, we have the gold, it's in Fort Knox, it's in West Point, it's in deep storage in the mountains of the West, and it's all bullshit. The gold we have is unmined ore owned by a number of special mining giant firms. I think that's going to be the backing for the dollar. That's why I call it the Scheisse dollar, because it's going to be revealed through independent global international auditing teams as being fraudulent, and then comes the currency declines. The other legitimate alternative that I keep hearing about from a number of pretty good sources, but they're new, so I don't know that they're tested well, is that the Chinese are going to lend the United States 10,000 tons of gold. So they will have, the U.S. and Washington will have a legitimate gold-backed currency. Now, no nation would lend 10,000 tons of gold without two things.
Collateral.
Well, or power.
Right. Well,
Control.
power can be collateral, right?
Yes, in a sense, but collateral is actually happening now, I think.
Right.
The two things that I was going to cite were having the gold not reside in the United States where the American bankers would steal it, like they have in the past. In other words, lease the gold but keep it in Shanghai.
Right.
The other is they would want to be in control of the rules. Well, the rules of what? How about the rules for congressional legislation and military action and banking policy and trade policy? In other words, the U.S. government is not control of the U.S. nation anymore. That's what you call colonization. Colonization. Okay, you mentioned they want collateral. Little do many Americans realize, but approximately 30 to 35% of most major city commercial buildings are now owned by the Chinese.
Is that high? 30 to 35%? Wow.
Yeah, I'm talking about Dallas, Chicago, Denver, Philadelphia, St. Louis, New York, Boston. 30 to 35% of the buildings are owned by the Chinese. They've been redeeming their U.S. Treasury bonds for the last 15 years. I think it's all part of their plan. They own the Los Angeles port facilities. They have the controlling interest of the Federal Reserve. They own One Chase Plaza, which is the headquarters of J.P. Morgan. The Chinese are buying all kinds of things. Back in September, I had an interesting little story that I fleshed out in the hat trick letter. It was based on a map, a very clever map, where it had a touch point features. Touch on New York State, and you see the 37 companies that are part of the free trade zone for the state of New York. Touch on Florida, and out pops the 26 companies that are part of the free trade zones under the state of Florida. Do the same for any one of the states. I did it for 20, 30 different states, and each one had quite a few. And I came to learn that 400 to 500 companies are part of free trade zones within the U.S. economy. And the great majority of them are Chinese.
So those are colonies that have been established.
Yes, and that really addresses the point of collateral. They own office buildings, they own ports, they own the biggest of the New York banks, they own the Federal Reserve controlling interest only. They're all over the place, and they have up let's say 400 companies across the U.S. that are part of free trade zones. So I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to feature one particular one? Then I found a story of a 35-year-old Chinese fellow who was in charge of a copper tubing company outside Birmingham, Alabama. And this fellow applied for state grants and got, breaks on income tax and property tax for a few years to get things set up. And now he's got things set up, he's got things running, and they're making copper tubing, and they employ 200 people. And I'm looking for details like fringe benefits, health plans, stuff like that. And I found it. They have minimal fringe benefits.
Right.
They have decent paying jobs. And here's the kicker. I always look for this. 1/3 of the copper tubing output was exported to China. I first read about this phenomenon way back in 2013. It had to do with alfalfa farms in the southwestern United States, like Texas, Arizona, California. Chinese were buying up alfalfa farms with an agreement with the U.S. government that 1/3 of the hay output, baled hay output, 1/3 was to be exported for livestock feed in China. And that's how I got onto this whole phenomenon of export to address the trade deficit. When the new dollar comes in, if it's not legitimate with a gold backing and instead has the fraudulent deep storage gold bullshit the U.S. government's been promoting for the last 20 years without any independent audit permitted whatsoever, in other words, it's all stolen. If the U.S. does not have a legitimate gold-backed currency, they're going to have to reduce the trade deficit. It's $500 billion a year. If they have a U.S.-only currency, that size of a deficit, that percentage of the economy, I think, is something like $14 trillion. So half a trillion dollars in deficit, that's 1 in 28. It's about 4%. A 4% annual deficit will result in probably a 10 to 15% annual devaluation of the currency. And we will be in the same position as Venezuela, where we export everything that's not nailed down and try furiously to build new industry, again, with foreign, like Chinese, executives and management and leadership and investment. The purpose will be to reduce the $500 billion annual deficit so we can stop the bleeding and stop the devaluations of the currency. And people might say, well, why is that so necessary? Because the devaluation of the currency means that everything costs more.
Right.
You get rampant currency crisis type inflation. I mean, if we don't have a legitimate gold-backed currency, Dash, in the United States, we're going to see an 80% decline of the new dollar. We're going to see a 5-fold increase in import costs. You like those Italian leather shoes? Well, they used to be $80 each. Try $400. All imports are going to cost more.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Of course they would.
And really, when you buy something that's made American, you got to look inside and look at the list and see that, well, 30% of it has imported components.
Yes.
And that means 30% of it will be subject to that 5-fold increase.
Yes.
Which is a 1.5. So look for that item made in the U.S. to go up double or more in price. Not 5-fold, but double. This is what comes from sacking the gold for the country by the elite. They did it in a very clever way. We've talked about it in the past. So I think right now the negotiations are fast, furious, and intense, where the Chinese ancient families are negotiating provisions for control in return for leasing the U.S. government 10,000 tons of gold. I just say 10,000 as a rough figure. Could be 12, could be 9. I don't know. It's going to need to be 10 to 15,000 tons of gold. And for those idiots out there who think, oh gosh, there's not enough gold out there to cover all the money. That's exactly the case. But turn it around. There's too much money to be backed by gold, and therefore gold must go up 5-fold in value.
Well, let's hope that happens and happens soon. Yes, it'll bring some tough times for the U.S., but you know what?
The U.S. needs to wake up and recreate its industry.
Exactly.
The origin of this big problem was 1984, where we began to outsource industry. And we were actually told in the 1980s and 1990s that we're going to become a financial engineering nation.
And they did.
And it backfired. It backfired. We're now living with fecal chloroform all through the U.S. economy. We have a toxic dollar. We have a lot of... I remember a conversation I had, this was about 4 years ago with my brother. My conversations with my brother are always interesting because he's educated in the standard economics way. In other words, he doesn't know anything about anything. He never listens to my interviews, so I don't care about insulting him. He's a good guy. He's got a great heart, but he doesn't know jack shit about economics. He said to me, Jim, every time the U.S. knocks down the interest rate to 0, we get a recovery in a matter of a year or two. I said, yeah, but not this time. I said this back in 2010. Not this time, John. Why not, Jim? I said, because the capital expenditures, CapEx investments, done by U.S. industries
are non-existent.
Well, they're non-existent on U.S. soil, but they're very prevalent in their foreign subsidiaries.
Hmm.
In other words, U.S. corporations are investing using the money, but they're doing it in their foreign operations.
Right.
They're building up their Pacific Rim operations. They're building up their Indian operation. They're building up their Latin American operations. And at the same time, this 0% was offered to emerging market nations, and they've built up, I've heard estimates of 5 trillion, I've heard estimates of 9 trillion. I think it depends on how do you define an emerging market nation. There's not a fixed definition there. They've got a number of definitions that you can put on the wall. So it's not just abuse of free money to lift the stock market. It's abuse of free money to inflate the emerging market nations, which are about to default, just like the energy firms. So, interesting times. Very interesting times.
No doubt. But in regards to this recovery, like I just read that Boeing's laying off 5,000 people. There's one of those ticker, reports that goes at the bottom of the screen the other day said, well, there's 10 states in the U.S. that have not recovered all the jobs that were lost since 2008. And I'm sure there's more than 10. So basically, yes, the recovery has been non-existent, as you have said all along. And now the evidence of all that is coming out into the open. So, Jim,
I call it the bitter fruit. I call it the bitter fruit of the fascist business model that was installed after 9/11. After 9/11, you saw the big banks take over control. You saw war becoming a major element to the U.S. industrial setting. You saw fraud permitted. You saw the too big to fail banks allowed to continue, and no felony charges, no executives serving prison time, just $238 billion of fines and penalties from Wall Street banks. And war is not good business. War is destructive of an economy. And the U.S. economy, I think, is facing systemic failure right now.
Anyhow, so, Jim, it's
the way to protect, though, is with gold and silver, bars and coins, etc. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for taking the time to come back on my program. Now we just approaching 2 hours, so I'm sure there's lots of material for people to digest. So before we go, can you please share with listeners information about your hat trick letter and your website and any other thing you'd like to share about how to contact you or to subscribe to your newsletter, etc.?
Okay, I'll be really brief. I tend to get long-winded describing the website, but I started this in April of 2004, so now we have 12 years. It's www.goldenjackass.com. Plenty of free items in there. Hard to describe them, really. It's interview links. It's public articles. I even recently started promoting, not just listing, showing up in the marquee, the upcoming interviews that are scheduled, and I've got a couple more in the next couple of days. So it's a lot of fun. I used to do 40 public articles a year and 2 or 3 interviews, and now it's more like, honestly, it's more like 30 or 40 interviews a year and 8 or 10 public articles. So the ratios have flipped, but it's the hat trick letter, which is the selling item. I'm marketing the hat trick letter newsletter. I'm the editor. I've got a very competent group of colleagues. I refuse to call them staff. They don't report to me. We're a group of equals, and recently had a new fellow join who's got some engineering background, and he's a very interesting fellow, and he just pitched in with something recently evaluating the Nicaraguan Canal as a potential project.
Oh, is that going to materialize, or is that just one of those stories that are floated around?
Suddenly have a tickle in my throat. Sorry. I believe the Nicaraguan Canal will never be built.
Okay.
I believe it was a hidden military base purchased by China with a bribe of hardwood. Hardwood culling in the forests. $2 to $3 billion worth of hardwood. So you pay off the Nicaraguan leaders with the hardwood sale proceeds. Give them another payoff that's spread around the economy for the Chinese military bases. And the canal's never built. All right, so I am wandering. Like I said, I would not. Anyway, the hat trick letter, been around 12 years. Bounce around in the free area. Look at the interviews. Look at the public articles. Come up to speed if you're very new at this, and add to some of your knowledge base if you're not new at this. And sign up for the newsletter. I love mentioning my two favorite compliments. The first one is I've been listening to your interviews for the longest time, and I never signed up because I figured that I was getting quite a lot out of the interviews, but for some reason I decided to sign up, maybe to give you a reward, but maybe out of curiosity to see what you have. And now I'm kicking myself for not signing up sooner. I just got that compliment yesterday or the day before from a new client. I should have signed up a long time ago, Jim. I've been following your work since 2011 or 12. The other compliment I love is I was